My family thought I was a failure, always stuck in the potential phase of life. But then my boyfriend arrived at our annual barbecue with a single antique key that blew our world apart. The smell of burnt hot dogs and freshly cut grass usually means summer. But in my family, it means it's time for the annual barbecue, which is less of a celebration and more of a public performance review. And this year, I was failing. Every single conversation felt like a meticulously crafted trap. My cousin Ashley was talking about her recent promotion to junior partner at her law firm. My other cousin David was showing off pictures of his brand new SUV, the kind with more screens than an IMAX theater. And I was just me. A graphic designer for a small nonprofit, engaged to the most wonderful man in the world, Liam. But in the eyes of my family, we were perpetually stuck in the potential phase of life. The ringmaster of this circus of passive aggression was, as always, my Uncle Mark. He's a man who measures success in square footage and horsepower, a man whose polo shirt is always one size too tight and whose laugh is always 3 decibels too loud. He had been circling me all afternoon like a shark that smells a drop of blood in the water. He'd already made a few jabs about my little art job and asked when I was going to get a real career. I just smiled, nodded, and tried to mentally transport myself to a happier place, a place where your self-worth wasn't tied to your tax bracket. Liam was running late. He'd texted me an hour ago saying he was tying up a few loose ends at work and would be here as soon as he could. I needed him. He was my shield, my anchor in the swirling vortex of my family's expectations. Without him, I was just a sitting duck. Uncle Mark finally cornered me by the condiment table while I was trying to decide if I could stomach another one of his wife's mystery Jell-O salads. He clapped a heavy hand on my shoulder, his gold signet ring digging into my collarbone. "So," he boomed, making sure at least half the patio could hear him. "I was just telling David here about the equity he's building. Smart kid. Knows the value of a solid investment." He gestured vaguely at the sprawling lawn of his own oversized house. "You see this? This is what it's all about. Security. A foundation." I mumbled something non-committal, trying to squirt some mustard on my burger bun, but he wasn't finished. "You and that boyfriend of yours." "Liam, is it? Still renting that little apartment downtown, right?" I nodded, my face growing hot. I knew where this was going. It was his favorite routine. "You know, with the market the way it is," he said, lowering his voice into a conspiratorial, patronizing tone, "you kids are going to be renting forever. I mean, let's be honest." He let out a short, barking laugh. "With what you two make, you'll be lucky to own a garden shed by the time you're my age." The comment landed like a physical blow. It wasn't just the words, it was the casual cruelty, the way he said it as an indisputable fact, a joke that everyone was in on except me. I saw my mother flinch out of the corner of my eye, but she didn't say anything. She never did. The silence from the surrounding family members was deafening. It was an endorsement. My hands were trembling as I set my plate down. "We're happy, Uncle Mark," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "We're saving. We have a plan." He waved his hand dismissively, sloshing beer from his bottle onto the pristine patio stones. "A plan? That's cute. Listen, kiddo, I'm just telling you how it is. Some people are owners and some people are renters. It's just the way of the world." He winked at my cousin David, who gave a weak, uncomfortable smile. The humiliation was a thick, suffocating blanket. I felt like a child being scolded in front of the entire class. I wanted the ground to swallow me whole. I wanted to scream. But most of all, I just wanted Liam. I retreated to a plastic lawn chair in the corner of the yard, nursing a warm soda and blinking back tears of sheer frustration. I pulled out my phone to text Liam to beg him to hurry when I saw his car pull into the long, curving driveway. Relief washed over me so intensely I felt lightheaded. He was here. My shield had arrived. He got out of his modest sedan, looking a little tired but smiling when he saw me. He started walking across the lawn, and my family's attention shifted to him. I could see the gears turning in their heads, assessing him. Good-looking guy, but drives an old Toyota. Nice enough, but what does he do again? Something with computers? Uncle Mark was already puffing out his chest, getting ready for round 2, this time with a new target. As Liam got closer, I saw that his usual easygoing smile was replaced with a look of quiet intensity. His eyes found mine, and he gave me a small, reassuring nod, as if he could sense my distress from 50 feet away. He walked right past my uncle, who had opened his mouth to deliver some fresh new insult, and came directly to me. He didn't say hello to anyone else. He just knelt down in front of my chair, oblivious to the 20 pairs of eyes watching our every move. "Sorry I'm late," he whispered, his voice for me and me alone. "I had to pick something up." He reached into the pocket of his jacket. My uncle, annoyed at being ignored, decided to fire his parting shot. "Hey, Liam," he called out, his voice dripping with condescension. "I was just telling your fiancé here that if she plays her cards right, you two might be able to afford a down payment on a mailbox one day." A few of my cousins snickered. Liam didn't even turn around. He kept his eyes locked on mine, a strange, beautiful light dancing in them. His hand came out of his pocket. He wasn't holding his phone or his wallet. He was holding a single antique-style key. It was heavy, ornate, and made of dark burnished brass. It looked like something that would unlock a castle. He held it out to me, resting it in the palm of my hand. The metal was cool against my skin. "What's this?" I breathed, completely confused. He finally glanced over his shoulder, his gaze sweeping over my uncle, my cousins, and my parents, a silent challenge to the entire audience. Then he looked back at me, his voice clear and steady, loud enough for everyone to hear. "That," he said, a slow smile spreading across his face, "is the key to our home." The air thickened, becoming heavy and silent. The chirping of crickets in the nearby woods suddenly sounded like a roar. Every eye on that patio was fixed on the brass key resting in my palm. It felt impossibly heavy, a tangible piece of a reality I couldn't comprehend. My mind scrambled, trying to fit this into the neat, disappointing box where I kept my future plans. A home? Was this some kind of joke? A symbolic gesture? Maybe it was the key to a fancy new post office box he'd rented to spite my uncle. That felt more plausible than the alternative. Uncle Mark was the first to break the spell. He let out a loud, incredulous laugh that was more of a bark. "A home?" he scoffed, wiping a fake tear from his eye. "What did you do, kid? Put a down payment on a dollhouse? Let me guess. It's one of those tiny homes on wheels, right? You can park it in your parents' driveway." Liam didn't flinch. He slowly rose to his feet, but he never took his eyes off me. He gently closed my fingers around the key. "It's the house on Chestnut Street," he said, his voice still calm, but now it carried across the yard like a bell. "The blue one, with the wraparound porch and the big oak tree in the front yard." A collective gasp went through the family. Not the house on Chestnut Street. Everyone knew that house. It was a local landmark, a gorgeous Victorian that had been on the market for months, its price tag a thing of local legend. It was the kind of house people pointed at as they drove by, the kind of house my family aspired to, the kind of house that was so far beyond the realm of possibility for me and Liam that it was laughable. My own breath hitched in my throat. We'd walked by that house 100 times. We'd romanticized it, dreamed about what it would be like to sit on that porch swing on a summer evening. It was our someday house, a fantasy we indulged in when the reality of our tiny apartment felt too suffocating. "You're lying," Uncle Mark snarled. The humor was gone from his voice, replaced by a raw, ugly disbelief. "That house is worth over $1 million. I know the realtor. There's no way. No way!" He was pointing a sausage-like finger at Liam, his face turning a blotchy red. "He's not lying, Mark." My dad's voice was quiet but firm. It was the first time he'd spoken up all day. He was looking at Liam with a new, stunned respect. "I saw the sold sign go up on the lawn this morning." The confirmation sent another shockwave through the crowd. The whispers started, a frantic buzz of speculation. How? Where did the money come from? Did he win the lottery? Did he have a secret trust fund? I was asking myself the same questions, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I looked at Liam, my fiancé, the man I thought I knew better than anyone, and suddenly he felt like a stranger. "Liam," I whispered, my voice trembling. "How?" "We've been saving every penny. I know what's in our account. This isn't possible." He finally looked away from me and met my uncle's furious gaze. "You're right about one thing, Mark," he said coolly. "We couldn't have afforded it with our salaries. You made that perfectly clear." He reached into his jacket pocket again and pulled out a folded sheaf of papers. He didn't unfold it. He just held it. "This wasn't a purchase, not in the way you think." "Then what was it?" my aunt chimed in, her voice shrill with curiosity. "A gift? Did your rich parents finally decide to help you out?" A shadow passed over Liam's face. He rarely spoke about his family. I knew his father had passed away when he was a teenager, and that his relationship with his mother was strained. They lived on the other side of the country, and to his telling, were not wealthy by any means. This was the one part of his life that was a closed book, and I had always respected his privacy. "No," Liam said, his voice losing its warmth, becoming flat and hard. "It wasn't a gift. It was an inheritance." An inheritance. The word hung in the air, offering an explanation that only created more questions. I stared at him, my mind racing. An inheritance from whom? And why had he never mentioned it? We were planning a life together, a marriage, and he was keeping a secret big enough to buy $1 million house? Uncle Mark pounced on the word, smelling a way to reclaim his dominance. An inheritance. "See? I told you. Some people work for what they have," he said, gesturing to himself, "and some people just get lucky. Daddy dies and leaves you a fortune. Must be nice." Liam's jaw tightened. A muscle pulsed in his cheek. He took a deep breath, and when he spoke again, his voice was low and laced with a pain so profound it made my own chest ache. "My grandfather passed away 2 months ago," he said, finally looking at me, his eyes full of apology for the secret he'd kept. "I didn't tell you because it's complicated. The whole family situation is. He left me the house, and it wasn't because he was a loving grandparent who wanted to provide for me." He paused, letting the silence stretch until it was almost unbearable. He looked from me to my uncle and then back to me. He left it to me because he felt guilty. He left it to me as an apology for what he did to my father. The story had just lurched into a dark, unfamiliar territory. A guilty inheritance? An apology from a dead man for a wrong done to another dead man? Before I could even begin to process the implications, Liam took my hand, his grip firm and grounding. "This isn't the place for this," he said softly. "Let's go. Let's go home." He started to lead me away from the stunned circle of my family, away from the smell of charcoal and my uncle's sputtering rage. We were almost to his car, almost free, when my mother's voice cut through the air. "Liam, wait!" We both turned. She was hurrying across the lawn, her face pale, her expression unreadable. She didn't look at me. Her eyes were locked on the ornate brass key still clutched in my hand. She stopped in front of us, breathing heavily, and reached out a trembling hand, not to touch the key, but just pointing toward it. "That key," she said, her voice a strange, choked whisper. "The design on it. The serpent eating its own tail. I've seen it before. My grandmother, your great-grandmother, she had a box of my grandfather's old things. There was a key in there. It looked exactly like that one." My mother's words seemed to suck all the remaining sound out of the backyard. The serpent eating its own tail. An Ouroboros. I looked down at the key in my hand. She was right. Etched into the head of the key was a small, detailed engraving of that exact symbol. It was a detail I hadn't even registered in the whirlwind of the last few minutes. Now it felt like it was burning a hole in my palm. Liam stared at my mother, his face a mask of utter confusion. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice strained. "What did you just say?" "My grandfather," my mother repeated, taking a tentative step closer. She was wringing her hands, a nervous habit I hadn't seen her do in years. "My mother's father. He passed away long before I was born, but my grandmother kept a few of his belongings in a small wooden box. She was very protective of it. I only saw inside it once when I was a little girl. There were some medals from the war, a faded photograph of a woman I didn't recognize, and a key. A big, old-fashioned key, just like that one, with a snake on it." Uncle Mark let out a derisive snort. "Helen, get a grip. It's a common design, probably from some fancy locksmith 100 years ago. You can't possibly think—" He trailed off, realizing no one was listening to him. All eyes were on my mother and Liam. "This house," Liam said slowly, gesturing back towards the street, in the direction of our impossible new home. "It was built in 1928. It's old. The keys are original." "He was a builder," my mother whispered, her eyes wide as if she was piecing something together in her own mind. "My grandfather. That's all Grandma would ever say about him. He was a builder, and he had sad eyes. She never talked about him otherwise. It was like he was a ghost." A cold dread began to seep into my bones, a feeling completely separate from the family drama. This was something else, something older and deeper. "Mom," I said, my voice hoarse, "what was his name? Your grandfather's name?" Liam's head snapped toward me, his eyes locking onto mine. I could see the same question forming on his lips, the same impossible, terrifying thought taking shape. My mother hesitated, looking around at the sea of curious faces. My dad stepped forward and put a supportive hand on her shoulder. "It's all right, Helen," he said gently. "What was his name?" She took a shaky breath. "His name was Arthur Vance." The reaction was instantaneous and violent. Liam physically recoiled, taking a step back as if he'd been struck. All the color drained from his face, leaving him a ghastly pale. The sheaf of papers he was still holding slipped from his fingers and scattered across the grass. He stared at my mother, his mouth slightly agape, his confident, controlled demeanor completely shattered. In its place was a look of raw, unadulterated horror. "No," he breathed. "No, that's not possible." "What is it, Liam?" I demanded, rushing to his side, grabbing his arm. It was cold as ice. "Who is Arthur Vance?" He wouldn't look at me. He was still staring at my mother, at this quiet, unassuming woman who had just detonated a bomb in the middle of his life. "The inheritance," he said, his voice barely audible. "The letter my grandfather left for me to read after he died. It was a confession." My uncle, sensing weakness, started to move forward. "A confession? What's this, some kind of soap opera?" "Mark, shut up!" my dad snapped, his voice cracking like a whip. For the second time in one day, he defended someone, and the shock of it silenced even my uncle. "Liam, talk to me," I pleaded, shaking his arm. "Please." He finally tore his gaze away from my mother and looked at me, and what I saw in his eyes terrified me. It was fear, pure fear. "My grandfather's name was Elias Thorne," he said, the words coming out in a rush. "He wasn't always a wealthy man. He made his fortune right after the Great Depression. He and his business partner started a construction company. They were incredibly successful, for a while." He stooped down, his hands trembling as he gathered the scattered papers from the lawn. He held them out, not for me, but for my mother. His partner's name was Arthur Vance. My grandfather, he cheated him. He falsified documents, leveraged their shared assets without his knowledge, and forced him into bankruptcy. He took everything. The company, the money, all the properties they'd built together. He ruined him. The pieces clicked into place with an awful, deafening clang. The house on Chestnut Street, the guilty inheritance, My great-grandfather, the builder with the sad eyes, the key with the serpent. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a reckoning. The house, I whispered, the words catching in my throat. The house was his. Liam nodded, his expression grim. It was the crown jewel of their portfolio, the one Arthur designed and built for his own family. It was the last thing my grandfather stole from him before Arthur disappeared. The letter said he left town with his wife and child, never to be seen again. My grandfather spent his entire life looking over his shoulder, terrified that Arthur Vance or his descendants would come back for revenge. He left me the house and a portion of his fortune as a way to try and right the wrong. A restitution. He said the Thorne family owed the Vance family a debt that could never truly be repaid. A heavy silence descended once more. My family was frozen, their petty squabbles and judgments forgotten, replaced by the weight of a 70-year-old crime. I was a Vance. I was the descendant my great-grandfather's betrayer had feared, and the man I was going to marry, the man I loved, was a Thorne. He had just handed me the key to a house that was stolen from my family, a home I never knew I had lost. Liam grabbed my hand, his grip desperate. "Come on," he choked out. "We have to go. We have to talk about this, not here." He pulled me toward the driveway, leaving my stunned family behind us. We got into the car, the silence between us so thick I could barely breathe. He started the engine and pulled away from the curb, away from my uncle's gaping mouth and my mother's tear-streaked face. We drove for several blocks without saying a word, the setting sun casting long, ominous shadows across the dashboard. I just stared at the brass key, still in my other hand. It wasn't a gift. It was evidence. It was a ghost. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I turned to him, my mind a chaotic storm of questions and accusations. "The letter," I said, my voice shaking. "Did it say anything else? Did your grandfather know what happened to Arthur Vance after he disappeared?" Liam kept his eyes fixed on the road, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. When he finally answered, his voice was a low, haunted whisper that chilled me to my core. "He said he assumed Arthur and his family had moved away to start a new life," Liam said. That was the story he told himself, anyway. But a few weeks after Arthur left town, they found his car abandoned by the old quarry, and his wife's winter coat was found washed up on the riverbank a mile downstream. The words hung in the cramped space of the car, more chilling than the blast of the air conditioner. His wife's winter coat was found washed up on the riverbank. 1,000 horrible images flooded my mind, each more gruesome than the last. The builder with the sad eyes hadn't just disappeared to start a new life. He and my great-grandmother had vanished under the most sinister of circumstances, leaving behind only their daughter, my grandmother. The story my family had held on to, the sanitized version of a father who simply left, was a lie. A comfortable lie to cover up a devastating, violent truth. "They were never found?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Their bodies?" Liam shook his head, his eyes still glued to the road ahead as if he was afraid to look at me, afraid to see the ghost of Arthur Vance in my face. "No, nothing." The police at the time ruled it a probable murder-suicide. The theory was that Arthur, despondent over losing everything, drove his wife to the quarry. And then, well, you can imagine. It was the Depression. People were desperate. Stories like that weren't uncommon. "But your grandfather didn't believe that," I stated, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. He didn't think it was a suicide. "He never said it outright in the letter," Liam said, his voice ragged. "But the guilt, it radiated off the page. He wrote about having nightmares for 60 years. He wrote about seeing Arthur's face in every crowd. He wasn't just afraid of a descendant coming back for financial revenge. He was afraid of something else. He was afraid of the truth. The truth. The truth was that Liam's grandfather hadn't just ruined my great-grandfather financially. He had, in all likelihood, driven him to his death. Or worse. The thought was so dark, so monstrous, that my mind shied away from it. Could Elias Thorne have been more than just a ruthless businessman? Could he have been a murderer? Had he stolen my family's legacy and then silenced the only person who could challenge him? We were driving through the tree-lined streets of the older part of town now. The late afternoon sun dappled through the leaves, creating a peaceful, idyllic scene that was completely at odds with the turmoil raging inside the car. Liam made a final turn, and there it was, the house on Chestnut Street. It stood at the end of the block, even more beautiful and imposing up close. The blue paint was faded and peeling in places. The wraparound porch sagged slightly, and the big oak tree in the yard looked ancient and wise, a silent witness to decades of secrets. It wasn't a dream home anymore. It was a crime scene. Liam pulled the car into the driveway and shut off the engine. The sudden silence was deafening. We just sat there, staring at the house, at this monument to my family's stolen past and his family's hidden sins. The ornate brass key in my hand felt like it weighed 100 pounds. It was the key to my inheritance, but it was also the key to his, an inheritance of guilt. "We don't have to do this," Liam said quietly, finally turning to look at me. His eyes were full of anguish. "We can sell it. We can take the money and go somewhere else, somewhere new, where nobody is a Vance or a Thorne. We can just be us." I looked from his desperate face to the house. Part of me screamed to take his offer, to run away from this century-old horror story that had just landed in our laps. But another, deeper part of me, a part I didn't know existed, felt a strange and powerful pull toward that front door. My great-grandfather had built this house. He had planned a life here. My grandmother, as a small child, had likely run through those rooms. This wasn't just a piece of real estate. It was the last tangible piece of a family I had never known. Selling it felt like a second betrayal. "No," I said, my voice firmer than I expected. "I need to go inside." Without waiting for a reply, I opened the car door and got out. My legs felt shaky, but I forced myself to walk up the cracked stone path toward the front porch. The air was sweet with the smell of honeysuckle from a nearby bush. I could hear the faint sound of children playing in a yard down the street. It was all so normal. I climbed the wooden steps, which groaned under my weight, and stood before the heavy oak door. The lock was as old and ornate as the key. I raised my trembling hand and slid the key into the lock. It turned with a satisfying, heavy clunk. Liam was right behind me. I could feel his presence, his hesitation. I pushed the door open. It swung inward on silent, well-oiled hinges, revealing a grand foyer. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light slanting through the tall, wavy glass windows. The air inside was cool and still, smelling of old wood, dust, and something else, something faintly floral like dried roses. A sweeping staircase curved up to the second floor. To the left was a massive living room with a stone fireplace, and to the right, a formal dining room. Everything was covered in white sheets, making the furniture look like a congregation of silent ghosts. My grandfather kept it exactly as it was. Liam's voice was a low murmur behind me. He never lived here. He never even rented it out. He just kept it. Paid the taxes, had a caretaker keep up the grounds. He said in the letter that he couldn't bring himself to change it or to profit from it. It was like a mausoleum. A mausoleum, the word was perfect. We were standing in a tomb dedicated to a forgotten tragedy. I stepped inside, my footsteps echoing on the hardwood floor. I walked through the living room, my fingers trailing over the sheet-covered lumps of furniture. A grand piano, a high-backed sofa, a wing-back chair positioned by the fireplace. I could almost picture him, my great-grandfather, sitting there after a long day of work, the fire roaring, my great-grandmother in the chair opposite him, a life that should have been. I felt drawn to the fireplace. The mantel was thick oak, dark with age. Above it, there was a large, rectangular patch on the wall that was slightly lighter than the surrounding faded wallpaper, the unmistakable outline of a painting that had hung there for a very long time. "There was a portrait here," Liam said, reading my thoughts, "of Elias Thorne, my grandfather. The caretaker took it down last week after the lawyers called him. It's being shipped to my mother." It felt like a small victory, an exorcism of sorts, to have the thief's image removed from his victim's hearth. I ran my hand along the cool wood of the mantelpiece. My fingers snagged on something. I looked closer. There was a tiny, almost invisible seam near the right edge of the mantel, a place where two pieces of the ornate carving didn't quite line up. It looked like the edge of a small, hidden drawer. My heart began to pound. On a wild impulse, I pressed against it. There was a faint click, and a small section of the mantel, no bigger than a brick, popped open. "Liam?" I gasped. He rushed to my side. We both peered into the small, dark cavity. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was a small, leather-bound book. It looked like a diary. And resting on top of it was another key. This one was smaller, more delicate, and made of silver. I reached in with trembling fingers and lifted the book out. The leather was dry and cracked with age. There was no name on the cover, no inscription. I opened it to the first page. The handwriting was feminine, a graceful looping cursive, now faded to a pale brown. The first entry was dated June 4th, 1934. "Elias came by the house again today," it began. "He says Arthur is a fool to trust him, but I see the way he looks at me when Arthur isn't in the room. He frightens me. I told Arthur we should sell our shares and move away, but he won't hear of it. He says Thorne is his partner, his friend. I fear my husband's trust will be our ruin. I have started writing this and hiding it, just in case, so someone will know the truth." The words on the page felt like a voice calling out from across a vast, dark ocean of time. So someone will know the truth. My great-grandmother. Her name was Eleanor. I knew that much from the sparse family tree my mother had once sketched out on a napkin. And here she was, her fears and anxieties preserved in faded ink, a message in a bottle she'd hidden in the heart of her own home. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the diary steady. Liam placed a steadying hand on my arm, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and dread as he read over my shoulder. "She knew," he whispered, his voice thick with disbelief. "She knew what he was, my grandfather. He wasn't just a con man, he was a predator." I flipped through the pages. Many entries were short, mundane notes about the house, the garden, her daughter, my grandmother, who would have been just a toddler then. But woven between these domestic scenes was a thread of rising panic. October 12, 1934. Elias brought papers for Arthur to sign today. Something about leveraging the Chestnut Street property for a new development. Arthur signed them without a second thought. I begged him to let our lawyer look them over first, but he laughed and called me a worrier. He said Elias was family. When Elias left, he squeezed my arm just for a moment. His grip was like iron. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. January 22nd, 1935. The letters from the bank have started. They say we are in default. Arthur is in a rage. He drove to Elias's office, but his secretary said he was out of town. He's been out of town for a week. Arthur keeps saying it's a mistake, a misunderstanding. But I see the terror in his eyes. He knows. He finally knows he's been betrayed. My own chest felt tight with a phantom grief. I was reading the anatomy of my family's destruction, minute by minute, day by day. This wasn't just a historical account. It felt immediate, personal. I could feel Eleanor's fear, her helplessness. I flipped to the last entry. The handwriting was frantic, jagged, the ink smudged in several places as if by tears or a trembling hand. The date was April 16, 1935. It would have been just days before they disappeared. He is ruined. Elias has taken everything. The company, our savings, even our home. The foreclosure notice came this morning. Arthur hasn't spoken a word all day. He just sits in his chair by the fire, staring into the flames. The look on his face. It is a look I have never seen before. It is not anger. It is not sadness. It is something hollow, something broken. Elias is coming over tonight. He called and said he wants to discuss terms. Arthur agreed to see him. I am so afraid. I am hiding this diary, and I am hiding the silver key. If something happens to us, if we are made to leave this house, I pray that someday someone in our family finds this. The key opens the safe deposit box at the downtown branch of the Merchants Bank. The box is in my name, Eleanor Vance. There are documents inside, the original partnership agreement, proof of what Elias has done. It may not be enough to get our home back, but it is enough to see him punished. It is enough for the world to know he is a thief and a liar, and worse. The Merchants Bank, Liam breathed, his face pale. It's still there. It's the big stone building on the corner of Main and Elm. It's a historic landmark now. A safe deposit box, untouched for nearly 70 years. A final, desperate move by a woman who knew she was in mortal danger. She had left behind the one thing that could destroy Elias Thorne: evidence. This changed everything. It was no longer just a family tragedy. It was a potential crime with a paper trail. The silver key felt cold and sharp in my palm. It wasn't just a key. It was a weapon. "We have to go," I said, snapping the diary shut. "We have to go to the bank. Right now." "Wait," Liam said, grabbing my arm. "Think about this. What if there's nothing in it? What if my grandfather somehow found out about it and emptied it years ago? Or what if what's inside is worse than we can imagine?" "What could be worse than what we already know?" I shot back, my voice sharp with adrenaline. "Your grandfather destroyed my family. He built his entire fortune on their ruin. My great-grandparents are likely dead because of him. I don't care what's in that box, Liam. I need to know." He saw the determination in my eyes and nodded slowly. "Okay," he said. "Okay, you're right." We left the house, leaving the ghosts and their dusty sheets behind. I locked the heavy oak door, the clunk of the lock echoing with a new finality. This wasn't just a house anymore. It was our quest. The drive downtown was a blur. My mind raced with possibilities. What kind of documents had she hidden? Deeds? Forged loan agreements? Witness statements? The final chilling word of her entry echoed in my head. And worse. What could be worse than being a thief and a liar? The Merchants Bank was an imposing granite fortress, a relic from an era when banks were built to look like temples. We walked into the grand marble-floored lobby, our modern clothes and quiet panic feeling utterly out of place. A stern-looking woman with perfectly coiffed gray hair sat at a reception desk. I took a deep breath and approached her. "Hello," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "This is a strange request, but I believe my great-grandmother opened a safe deposit box here a very long time ago. I have the key." I placed the small silver key on the polished marble countertop. The woman eyed it with suspicion, then looked at me over the top of her glasses. "The name on the account?" she asked, her tone clipped and professional. "Eleanor Vance," I said. Her fingers tapped on her keyboard for a long moment. I held my breath. Liam stood beside me, a silent, tense statue. The woman's eyebrows shot up. "Well, I'll be," she muttered, more to herself than to us. "The account is still active, unclaimed since 1935. There's quite a bit of accrued service fees, but according to the original charter, the contents of these legacy boxes are preserved in perpetuity." She looked at me again, her expression softening with curiosity. You'll need to provide proof of identity and kinship, of course. A driver's license, a birth certificate, your mother's birth certificate. It's a process. My heart sank. A process, bureaucracy, red tape. It could take weeks, months. Is there any way to expedite it? I asked, a note of desperation creeping into my voice. She seemed to take pity on me. Let me see your ID first. I handed it over. She studied it, then looked at a file on her screen. All right, she said, making a decision. Given the age of the account, I can grant you a one-time supervised viewing of the contents. You won't be able to remove anything until the legal paperwork is complete, but you can see what's inside. Follow me. She led us through a heavy, circular vault door that looked like it could withstand a direct hit from a bomb. The air inside was cool and dry. She stopped in front of a wall of gleaming steel boxes and inserted her own master key, along with my silver key, into a lock-numbered 412. With a quiet click, she pulled out a long, narrow metal box and placed it on a viewing table in a small, private room. Then she discreetly closed the door, leaving Liam and me alone with the box. It felt like opening a pharaoh's tomb. My hands were trembling so much that Liam had to steady them as I lifted the lid. The box wasn't full. Inside, there were only 2 items. The first was a thick manila envelope tied with a string. The second, lying next to it, made the air go out of my lungs. It was a photograph. A small black and white picture of a man and a woman standing in front of the house on Chestnut Street. My great-grandparents, Arthur and Eleanor Vance. He was handsome, with a kind smile and sad eyes, just as the story went. She was beautiful, her arm linked through his, a look of profound love on her face. For the first time, they were real to me. With a deep breath, I reached for the envelope. The paper was brittle with age. I carefully untied the string and unfolded the flap. Inside was a stack of papers, just as Eleanor's diary had promised. There was a copy of the original partnership agreement for Vance and Thorne Construction. There were bank statements showing large, unexplained withdrawals from the company accounts, all signed by Elias Thorne. There was a letter from a lawyer warning Arthur that the documents he'd signed were essentially a transfer of all his assets to Thorne. It was a meticulous record of the betrayal. It was the proof. But there was something else. Tucked at the very back of the stack was a smaller, folded piece of paper. It looked different from the official documents, the paper thinner, the writing on it hurried. I unfolded it. It wasn't a legal document, it was a note, just a few lines written in my great-grandmother's familiar cursive. He knows I have this proof. He came to the house. Arthur tried to reason with him, but there is a madness in Elias's eyes. He is not just a thief. I saw him when he thought no one was looking. He has Arthur's hunting rifle. This is not about the money anymore. He's taking us to the old quarry. He says we're going for a drive. If you are reading this, do not trust the police. His brother is the chief of police. The small, sterile viewing room suddenly felt like a coffin. The air, once just cool, was now frigid, and I couldn't seem to draw a full breath. His brother is the chief of police. The sentence was a key of its own, unlocking a new and far more horrifying chamber in this nightmare. It wasn't just a betrayal between partners. It was a conspiracy. The police report, the ruling of a murder-suicide, the abandoned car, the coat by the riverbank. It was all a lie. A carefully constructed narrative to cover up a cold-blooded murder, orchestrated by Elias Thorne and enabled by the one person who was supposed to uphold the law. Liam made a strangled noise beside me, a sound of pure revulsion. He slumped back against the wall, his face ashen. "My great-uncle," he whispered, his eyes wide with horror. His name was Robert Thorne. He was the police chief for almost 30 years. He was a local hero. They named a park after him. A park named after a man who helped his brother get away with double murder. The sheer generational depravity of it was staggering. The Thorne family fortune, the legacy that had given Liam's family their standing, wasn't just built on theft. It was built on a foundation of blood and lies. "She knew," I said, my voice a dead monotone. I was staring at the photograph of my smiling great-grandparents, so full of life and hope. She knew he was going to kill them. She wrote that note and somehow got it here, into this box, before he took them. How had she done it? Had she slipped away to the bank that final, terrifying day? Or had she entrusted the note to someone, a friend, a neighbor, with instructions to place it in the box if she didn't return? The bravery it must have taken to face certain death and still try to leave behind a testament, a final cry for justice. It was overwhelming. This was no longer just about reclaiming a house or a lost inheritance. This was about murder. And the murderer's grandson was standing right next to me. I looked at Liam. He looked utterly broken, a man whose entire identity had been dismantled in the space of a few hours. He was the descendant of a monster, the beneficiary of a horrific crime. He met my gaze, and I saw no defensiveness, no excuses. I saw only a profound and bottomless shame. "What do we do?" he asked, his voice cracking. "What can we possibly do?" "We expose him," I said, the words tasting like metal in my mouth. "We take this to the police. The real police now. We take it to the newspapers. We tell the world who Elias Thorne was. We tell them what Robert Thorne did. We clear my great-grandparents' names." "And what then?" Liam asked, his voice filled with despair. "It was 70 years ago. The brothers are dead. The evidence is circumstantial. A handwritten note? They'll call it a family feud, a historical curiosity. And my family, my mother, my cousins, they'll be destroyed. The Thorne name will be synonymous with murder." I knew he was right. Part of him was, anyway. It would be a brutal, ugly fight. The Thorne family was still influential in this town, their name on buildings and charity plaques. They would fight back with everything they had. They would paint me as a gold digger, a fantasist dredging up ancient history for a payday. But the thought of letting the lie stand, of letting Elias and Robert Thorne rest as respected men in their graves, while my great-grandparents lay nameless in some unmarked one, it was unbearable. "I don't care about the Thorne name, Liam," I said, my voice hardening. "I care about the truth." He flinched as if I had slapped him. I saw a flicker of something in his eyes, pain, fear, and something else I couldn't quite read. He pushed himself off the wall and began to pace the tiny room like a caged animal. "I know," he said, running a hand through his hair. "I know, it's just, this is my whole life. Everything I thought was real. Everything I was told about my family, my heritage, it's all built on this, on their graves." We fell silent, the weight of the evidence in the metal box pressing down on us. The path forward was a minefield. Exposing the truth could tear us apart, pitting my quest for justice against his loyalty to a family he was only now realizing he didn't truly know. The woman from the bank knocked softly on the door. "Your time is up," she said through the wood. Carefully, reverently, I placed the photograph, the documents, and Eleanor's final, desperate note back into the envelope and laid them in the box. I felt like I was sealing my great-grandparents back in their tomb. We watched the bank employee lock the box away in its steel compartment. The double click of the lock sounded like a jail door slamming shut. The drive back to the house on Chestnut Street was heavy with unspoken thoughts. The world outside the car seemed oblivious, bathed in the golden light of the setting sun, while inside we were trapped in a dark history. When we pulled into the driveway, the house looked different again. It was no longer a crime scene, but a witness. It had stood here all this time, holding its secrets, waiting. We walked inside, not bothering with the lights. We stood in the grand foyer as the shadows deepened, turning the sheet-covered furniture into looming spectral shapes. "My whole life I've heard stories about my grandfather," Liam said into the twilight. "They called him a titan of industry, A self-made man who pulled himself up by his bootstraps during the Depression. They said he was tough, but fair, a pillar of the community. He let out a short, bitter laugh. He wasn't a pillar. He was the rot in the foundation. He walked over to the fireplace, the place where we'd found the diary, the genesis of this whole unraveling. He leaned his forehead against the cool wood of the mantel. "I can't live here," he said, his voice muffled. "I can't sleep in this house knowing how it came to me. Every creak in the floorboards, every shadow in the corner. It would just be them. Arthur and Eleanor. I'd be a ghost in their home." "It's my home, Liam," I said softly, coming to stand behind him. "He didn't leave it to you. He returned it to me." He turned to face me, his eyes glistening in the gloom. "I know, but I'm a thorn. I have his name. I have his blood. How can you even look at me?" "You are not your grandfather," I said, my voice fierce. I reached out and took his hands. They were freezing. "You are the man who came to my family's barbecue to stand up for me. You're the man who wanted to right a wrong. You are not Elias Thorne." He squeezed my hands, a desperate, drowning grip. "But what do? We have the truth, locked away in a bank vault. If we unleash it, we start a war we might not win, and it could destroy everything. If we do nothing, we let them get away with it forever. We live here, in this house, with their ghosts, and we become part of the lie." He was right. We were trapped between an impossible past and an unthinkable future. There seemed to be no path forward that didn't end in ruin, either ours or our families. I looked around the darkening room at the silent, watching house. Eleanor had left us the truth, but she hadn't left us a map for what to do with it. We were on our own. "Maybe there's another way," I said, a thought beginning to form in the chaos of my mind. "Maybe we don't need the police or the newspapers. Not yet." I thought of the diary, of the hidden compartment, of the decades of silence. This house had held its secrets well. Maybe it held more. "Your grandfather was terrified of the descendants of Arthur Vance coming back. He wrote about it in his confession letter, a man that paranoid, that guilty. He wouldn't just leave one confession. He would have been obsessed with it. This house, it was his mausoleum, you said. People don't just leave things in mausoleums. They bury things." Liam looked at me, his eyes questioning. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying Elias Thorne was a builder," I said, my gaze sweeping across the room, the thick walls, the stone fireplace, the solid oak floors. He knew how to build things. He also knew how to hide things. The diary was hidden in the mantelpiece he stared at every day. Eleanor's final note was in a bank vault. These were people who hid their most important truths in plain sight. What if your grandfather did the same? What if the rest of the story, the full confession, the details of that night, what if it's here, somewhere in this house? A flicker of something not hope, but a desperate, focused energy lit up in Liam's eyes. It was a long shot, a wild guess born of desperation, but it was better than the crushing paralysis we were trapped in. It was a course of action. "The study," he said, his voice suddenly urgent. "The caretaker said my grandfather sealed it up in the 50s, nailed the door shut and wallpapered over it. He told everyone it was because of drafts. But what if that was a lie?" We found it at the end of the upstairs hallway, a section of the wall where the floral wallpaper pattern didn't quite match. I ran my hand over it and felt the unmistakable outline of a door frame beneath the paper. Liam retrieved a crowbar from the trunk of his car, and together, we began to pry at the edges. The old plaster cracked, and the wallpaper ripped, revealing the dark wood of a solid oak door, its knob removed, its seams sealed with thick, yellowed paint. With a final groaning screech of nails being torn from century-old wood, the door swung inward, releasing a blast of stale, musty air. We stepped into a room frozen in time. A thick layer of dust covered everything. A heavy mahogany desk stood against one wall, a leather chair behind it. Bookshelves lined the other walls, their leather-bound volumes untouched for half a century. But it was the wall behind the desk that drew our attention. It was covered in a chaotic collage of maps, newspaper clippings, and handwritten notes, all connected by a web of red string. At the very center of it all was a large, faded photograph. It wasn't of Arthur or Eleanor. It was a picture of a small girl with big, dark eyes and a solemn expression, my grandmother, and scrawled beneath it in a shaky, angry hand were two words that made my blood run cold. She knows. The air in the sealed room was thick and dead, each particle of dust a microscopic piece of the past. She knows. The words were a visceral gut punch, a madman's scrawl beneath the innocent face of my grandmother as a child. This wasn't just a study. It was a shrine to Elias Thorne's paranoia, an obsessive, terrifying testament to the guilt that had consumed him for decades. My grandmother would have been just a little girl when her parents were murdered. What could she possibly have known? Liam stepped forward, his feet crunching softly on the dusty floorboards. He reached out and touched the edge of the photograph, his hand trembling. "This is insane," he breathed. He was watching her. He spent his life watching her grow up. My eyes scanned the web of madness on the wall. There were newspaper clippings announcing my grandmother's high school graduation, her wedding announcement to my grandfather, even a birth announcement for my mother. There were grainy, long-lens photographs of her pushing a stroller in a park, of my mother as a teenager getting her driver's license. He had stalked my family for 2 generations. The security and foundation my Uncle Mark so admired were built not just on theft and murder, but on a lifetime of quiet, menacing surveillance. Elias Thorne hadn't just been looking over his shoulder for a descendant seeking revenge. He'd been actively tracking them, monitoring them, ensuring the secret stayed buried with him. He wasn't afraid of revenge, I said, a sickening realization dawning on me. He was afraid of a witness. Could my grandmother, as a small child, have seen something on that final, terrible night? A face, a car, an argument? Could she have held a small, fractured memory that Elias Thorne believed could destroy him? It seemed impossible, but the evidence was all around us, a spiderweb of fear spun by a guilty conscience. Liam moved toward the heavy mahogany desk, wiping a thick layer of dust from its surface. It was bare, except for a tarnished brass letter opener and a solid crystal inkwell. He pulled at the main drawer, but it was locked. "The key," he said, looking at me, "the brass key to the house." My heart pounded as I retrieved the ornate key from my pocket. It felt different now, not just a key to a house, but a key to the final, darkest secrets of this story. Liam took it from me and slid it into the keyhole on the desk. It was a perfect fit. With a click, the lock disengaged. He pulled the drawer open. Inside, there was only a single object, a small reel-to-reel audio tape in a cardboard box. The label on the box was written in Elias's same jagged handwriting. The date was November 12th, 1978. It was the week before he died. My mind raced. Reel-to-reel players weren't exactly common anymore. "My dad," Liam said, echoing my thoughts. "He's an audiophile. He collects old stereo equipment. He has a player in the basement." Suddenly, there was no other option. We couldn't wait. We couldn't strategize. We had to hear what was on that tape. We carefully placed the box in my handbag, left the secret room of obsession untouched, and pulled the broken door shut behind us, trapping the ghosts once more. The drive to Liam's parents' house felt even more fraught than the drive to the bank. We were bringing this poison into his family's home now. His mother, a sweet woman who always sent me home with leftovers, had no idea that her father-in-law was a murderer. Liam's father, a quiet, gentle man, believed his own father was a local legend. We were about to shatter their world, just as ours had been shattered. When we arrived, Liam's father was, predictably, in the basement, tinkering with a vintage amplifier. He was surprised to see us, but his face lit up when Liam showed him the reel-to-reel tape. "Well, look at this. A real relic. Where'd you find it? He asked, his eyes twinkling with innocent curiosity. It was in Grandpa Elias's things, Liam said, his voice strained. We found it in the house. We were wondering if you could play it for us. Of course, his father said, pleased to be of service. He carefully threaded the thin brown tape through the complex machinery of a massive silver tape deck. He flipped a series of switches, and the reels began to turn slowly, silently. Then, with a crackle of static, a voice filled the room. An old man's voice, thin and reedy, but filled with a chilling, familiar arrogance. It was Elias Thorne. Testing. November 12th, 1978. My name is Elias Thorne. If anyone is listening to this, it means I am dead, and it means the lawyers have followed my instructions. This is not a confession. A man like me has nothing to confess. It is a clarification, a setting of the record straight for posterity. They will call me a great man, a builder, a philanthropist, and they will be right. I built this town, but greatness requires sacrifice. It requires difficult decisions. Liam's father stared at the spinning reels, his smile fading, replaced by a look of deep confusion. Liam and I stood frozen, gripping each other's hands. Arthur Vance was my partner. The voice continued, dripping with a strange mix of self-pity and contempt. He was a brilliant builder, but a weak man, a sentimentalist. He lacked vision. When the depression hit, he wanted to scale back, to be cautious. I knew that was the path to ruin. I saw an opportunity to build an empire, and he was standing in the way, so I removed him. The paperwork was a masterstroke. He signed his own death warrant and never even knew it. He paused, and we could hear the faint clinking of ice in a glass. He had been drinking as he recorded his life's great crime. But the fool wouldn't let it go. He came to the house, waving papers, threatening to expose me. His wife, that sanctimonious Eleanor, she was worse. She had a file, documents. She looked at me with those knowing eyes. They thought they could ruin me. They underestimated me. They always did. The voice dropped lower, becoming a conspiratorial rasp. So I made my brother, Robert, an offer. Half of everything I took from Vance if he helped me. Clean up the mess. He was always the pliable one, eager for a taste of the good life. We drove them out to the quarry. Arthur was quiet the whole way, defeated. But the wife, Eleanor, she fought. She clawed at me, screamed. Robert had to hold her. It was unpleasant. I felt bile rise in my throat. Liam's father had gone pale, sinking into a nearby chair as if his legs could no longer support him. We did what had to be done. Elias's voice crackled on, devoid of any emotion. Robert's boys staged the car. We disposed of the bodies in the foundation of the new city hall we were building. Poetic, I thought. Arthur Vance, the great builder, becoming a permanent part of the city he helped create. No one ever found them. No one ever will. They were in the foundation of City Hall, buried under decades of concrete and bureaucracy. My great-grandparents had been under our feet this entire time. A wave of nausea and grief so profound washed over me that I nearly collapsed. But Elias Thorne wasn't finished. There was only one loose end, the girl, their daughter. She was there that night, at the house. Just a toddler. She saw us. She saw me and Robert leaving with her parents. She couldn't have understood, of course. But she saw. I wanted to take care of it then, but Robert lost his nerve. He said we'd done enough. So I watched her. I watched her her entire life, waiting for a flicker of memory, for a word out of place. But there was nothing. She remembered nothing. A blessing. The Vance line is weak, forgetful, and now it is irrelevant. The tape hissed for a few more seconds and then fell silent. The reels stopped turning. The only sound in the basement was the hum of the amplifier and the sound of three people's worlds imploding. Liam's father was staring into space, his face a mask of horrified disbelief. Liam looked like he had aged 20 years, and I was filled with a white-hot rage that burned away all fear, all sadness. We finally had it, not just a clue or a diary entry, a full confession in the murderer's own words, a detailed account of the crime, the cover-up, and the motive. We had his voice. We had the truth. Suddenly, Liam's father lunged forward and slammed the stop button on the tape deck. "No," he whispered, shaking his head. "No, this has to be a fake, a forgery. My father, he wasn't—" "It's him, Dad," Liam said, his voice hollow. "We found it in his desk. It's him." "We have to destroy it," his father said, his eyes wild. He reached for the tape. "This can never get out. It would ruin us. It would ruin everything." "No," I shouted, moving to block him. "This is evidence. This is justice for my family." "What family?" He shot back, his grief twisting into a desperate anger. "A family of ghosts. This tape will destroy the living. My wife, your mother, Liam. She would not survive this." He looked at Liam, his expression pleading. "Son, think about what you're doing. This is our family." Liam was caught in the middle, his father on one side, me on the other. He was being asked to choose between justice for the dead and protecting the living, between my family and his. He looked from his father's frantic face to mine, his own expression a torment of indecision. The confession, the ultimate weapon, sat silently in the machine between us. Before anyone could move or say another word, a new voice cut through the tension from the top of the basement stairs. "What's going on down there? What tape are you all shouting about?" It was Liam's mother. She started down the stairs, a curious, pleasant smile on her face. But her smile faltered as she took in the scene. Her husband's terrified expression, my tear-streaked face, her son's anguish. Her eyes finally landed on the reel-to-reel player. She stared at it, her head cocked to one side, a strange, distant look clouding her features. "That machine," she said softly, her voice taking on a dreamy, faraway quality as she reached the bottom step. "I remember a machine like that. In Grandpa Elias's study, he used to make recordings. I was just a little girl. I wasn't supposed to go in there, but I did once. I heard him talking to it." She paused, her eyes unfocused, as if she were looking back through a long, dark tunnel of memory. "He was talking about the Vances. He sounded angry." She looked at the machine, then at Liam, then at me, and then her eyes widened in a flash of absolute blood-curdling recognition, as if a switch had just been flipped in her brain. "The girl," she whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. "He wasn't talking about the Vance's daughter. He was talking about me. I was the one who saw them. I was the witness." The confession in the basement wasn't about my grandmother. It was about her, Liam's mother. The timeline clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Elias Thorne's brother, the police chief Robert Thorne, had a daughter who would have been a little girl at the time of the murders, a daughter who could have been at the house that night, a daughter whose, in a desperate act of self-preservation, Robert might have adopted out or given to a trusted family to raise, changing her name and bearing her past to protect her from his monstrous brother. He had hidden the witness in plain sight under a new identity, one that Elias would never have suspected. Liam's mother, or the woman we knew as his mother, stumbled back, her face a canvas of dawning horror. I remember," she stammered, her voice trembling as fragmented memories, suppressed for a lifetime, broke through to the surface. "A big car in the driveway, my aunt and uncle. They were crying. My father, Robert." He was shouting at another man, a scary man with cold eyes. "Elias. He put me in the car. He told me my real parents had to go away on a long trip and that I was going to live with him and my mother now. He told me I must never, ever speak of it again. She wasn't a Thorne by blood. She was a Vance. She was the daughter of Arthur and Eleanor. She was my grandmother's sister, my great-aunt. The cousins Liam sometimes mentioned weren't related to him at all. The entire family tree was a lie, a carefully constructed fiction to hide the last surviving victim of Elias Thorne's crime. Liam's father stared at his wife of 40 years as if seeing her for the first time. Helen, he breathed, using her real name, the name from the birth certificate her adoptive parents, Robert Thorne and his wife, had falsified. The truth was an earthquake, and our entire world was collapsing into the fissures. Liam, my Liam, wasn't the grandson of a murderer. He was the son of a victim. The blood of the Vances flowed in his veins, just as it did in mine. We weren't the star-crossed descendants of a bitter feud. We were family. The weight of the Thorne legacy, the guilt he had carried for the past day, lifted from his shoulders, replaced by a grief that was now rightfully his. He went to his mother, wrapping his arms around her as she began to sob, decades of buried trauma finally breaking free. The dynamic in the room shifted instantly. Liam's father was no longer a man trying to protect a killer's legacy. He was a husband trying to protect his wife from the resurrected horror of her childhood. The tape was no longer a threat to his family name, but the key to validating his wife's stolen history. "What do we do?" he asked, his voice raw. He looked at me, not with anger, but with a desperate plea for guidance. And in that moment, I knew. The rage I felt had been a fire, but now it was forging something new, a plan. "We give them what they wanted," I said, my voice clear and steady. "Elias wanted a legacy. Robert wanted respectability. We're going to use their own confession to tear it all down." We didn't go to the police, not at first. We went to the city archives. With the information from the tape, the foundation of the new city hall, we found the original architectural plans from 1935. We found the construction logs signed by Vance and Thorne Construction. We had a time, a place, and a confession. Then we hired the best lawyer in the state, a woman known for taking on impossible cases against powerful institutions. We presented her with the diary, the documents from the safe deposit box, and a digital copy of the tape. We didn't want a criminal trial against dead men. We wanted something more. We filed a civil suit against the city of Thornfield, the town Elias had essentially built and named after himself and against the Thorne family estate. The lawsuit was an atomic bomb. It demanded the exhumation of human remains from the foundation of City Hall and the restoration of the Chestnut Street property and a significant portion of the Thorne estate to the last surviving heir of Arthur and Eleanor Vance, Liam's mother. The Thorne family, my Uncle Mark included, were apoplectic. They hired a team of expensive lawyers who painted us as charlatans, grave robbers, and extortionists. They claimed the tape was a sophisticated fake. They claimed Liam's mother was mentally unstable. But we had the truth. The story was too compelling, too horrific to ignore. The press descended on the town. The story of the stolen fortune, the hidden diary, the secret tape, and the lost heir became a national sensation. Under immense public pressure, the city had no choice but to agree to a court order. They would drill into the foundation. I stood with Liam and his parents behind a police barricade on a cold, gray morning, watching as a team of forensic archaeologists used ground-penetrating radar and core drills on the steps of City Hall. My entire extended family was there, huddled together on the other side of the square, their faces a mixture of confusion, shame, and morbid curiosity. Uncle Mark wouldn't look at me. His entire identity, built on the worship of Thorne-style success, was crumbling to dust. After hours of drilling, one of the technicians shouted. They had found an anomaly, a void in the concrete that shouldn't have been there. They sent down a small camera. And then, the lead archaeologist, a grim-faced woman, walked over to our lawyer. She spoke in a low voice, and our lawyer nodded, her face impassive. She came over to us. "They've found them," she said softly. "The remains of 2 individuals consistent with the timeline. It's them." A collective gasp went through the crowd. Liam's mother let out a small, wounded cry and collapsed into her husband's arms. It was over. The lie was dead. My great-grandparents, after 70 years buried in darkness, had finally been found. The rest was a formality. The Thorne family's defense evaporated. DNA testing confirmed the identities of Arthur and Eleanor Vance. Faced with irrefutable proof and public outrage, the estate settled. The park named after Robert Thorne was renamed Vance Memorial Park. A plaque was erected at City Hall telling the true story of its foundation, and the house on Chestnut Street, along with a substantial portion of the Thorne fortune that was rightfully ours, was legally transferred to its true owners. We gave my great-grandparents the funeral they never had. The whole town came, it seemed. My Uncle Mark was there. He approached me after the service, his face haggard. "I'm sorry," he mumbled, not meeting my eye. "I was a fool." I just nodded. There was nothing else to say. A few months later, on a bright sunny afternoon, we had another family barbecue. Not at my uncle's house, but on the sprawling lawn of the house on Chestnut Street. It was our house now. Liam and I had moved in with his parents. We were slowly, carefully bringing the house back to life, filling its quiet rooms with light and laughter. The white sheets were gone, the dust was cleared, and the scent of old roses had been replaced by the smell of fresh paint and baking bread. Liam's mother, my Aunt Helen, was sitting on the porch swing, a real peaceful smile on her face for the first time since this all began. She was starting to remember more of her early childhood, small, happy memories of her real parents. She was reclaiming her past. Liam stood beside me at the grill, flipping burgers, his arm around my waist. The weight was gone from his shoulders. He was no longer a Thorne or a Vance. He was just Liam, the man I loved. He leaned in and kissed me. "You know," he whispered in my ear, "my grandfather was wrong about one thing. The Vance line isn't weak. It's the strongest thing I've ever known." I looked at our family, my family, spread out across the lawn, a tapestry of Vances and Thornes, woven together by tragedy but stitched back together by truth. I looked at the beautiful blue house, a monument not to a crime but to survival, and I held up the single ornate brass key, which I now wore on a chain around my neck. It wasn't a symbol of ownership or wealth. It was a promise that no matter how long it takes, no matter how deep the secrets are buried, the truth eventually finds its way home.